Hi there, good morning. Welcome back to the podcast of Wednesday's Child. So you have three of us on the podcast this morning and really looking forward to chatting to our guest, who is a doctor in psychiatry, no less, and also happens to share her own experience of eating disorders. But without further ado, I'm going to start by welcoming back my co-host, Sarah. Hi, Sarah, how are you doing?
Good, thank you, Debbie. It's chilly in Middlesbrough today, sunny, but chilly.
You got no snow on the ground then, where you are?
Well, we went for a dog walk yesterday and we had lots of snow, lots of crunching snow. We had a little snowball fight, but no, just all bright sunshine today.
It feels quite surreal, doesn't it, after the sunny period that we had a couple of weeks ago, or only a week ago it might have been.
Yeah, I was travelling back from Nottingham on Friday and I think I went through every season on the M1.
The joys of living in lovely England, hey?
Indeed.
We're making people jealous, that live in a non-climate type country.
Oh yeah, those that are sat in the baking 24 degrees now will be really envious of us sat in the cold.
Whereas frankly, if you could give me a beach and some hot sunshine right now, that would be quite nice. It's about this time of year I start thinking about kind of fake tan and things like that. I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have to get rid of this pastiness one way or the other.
Oh, I don't do fake tan. I'm too ginger for fake tan. I just look like a walking, talking biscuit if I do
well,
it.
I can't do it because I'm hopeless at applying it, and I end up with the only place I end up with brown is on my hat. Okay, right. So we've got a great guest on, and our guest today is somebody that if you joined our lives, which I think we must have done beginning of March, so Eating Disorders Awareness Week, we did one of our live sessions was with Caroline Baumber, and it was just such a pleasure to chat to her. And normally we will have introduced people to our community via a podcast first and then got them on live. But in Caroline's case, we did it the other way around. So you've heard enough from me. I want to welcome today Caroline. Hi, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me back. I've been looking forward to this.
Oh, good stuff. How about you? Are you huddled up out there? You're in Yorkshire, aren't you? So how is it with you?
Yeah, it's a bit miserable. It's not raining yet, but I'm sure that'll reach us at some point. But yeah, the past week's been a bit all over the place.
Oh, do you know what? I actually don't think of Yorkshire as a place that just rains constantly. I always think of it as like blue skies and scenic, but yeah, maybe that's just when people send you podcasts from there. Postcards. You can tell I've got podcasts in the mind. When people send you postcards from Yorkshire, it's always that beautiful blue sky and green grass type picture, and that's always what I imagine it to be.
Oh, well, I'm this like try and make everything positive, so even when it's really bleak out, I go, oh, isn't it bracing, isn't it stunning, look how magical the hills look. But it's actually just it's just raining and grey.
Hey, we're touching on a metaphor for eating disorder and eating disorder recovery here, ladies.
Oh, that's so true. Find the positive. Okay, so where are the blue skies in recovery, Caroline? We're going to start, aren't we, by talking a little bit about your journey with an eating disorder and kind of, what helps you have empathy to our community. So do you want to share away and tell us as much of your story as you feel comfortable to do? And Sarah and I are going to chip in, as we often do, and interrogate you along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So my eating disorder started probably similarly to how it did for a lot of your listeners, but I was a teenager and I just changed schools. So I was 13, I just changed schools, and it was sort of on the background of I'd always felt too big and not liked how I looked, as I'm sure lots of people who are like in that prepubescent phase feel awkward and uncomfortable. And then when I moved schools, I was feeling, I don't know, uncomfortable about it, feeling apprehensive. And I took that as the opportunity of like, well, now I'm going to lose weight. And it was immediately, it became an eating disorder. There was no sort of healthy, well, whether you can diet healthy as a child, I don't know, but there was no sort of interim period. It was immediately, I just started being very secretive, very restrictive, and my whole mood changed very, very quickly. So
you say that about your mood changing. So was it you that was aware of it, or were you aware of how other people were relating to you, that they were noticing behavioural changes?
A bit of both. So I remember within the first few weeks of this experiment that I was doing, I was really labile. Like I was never really the stroppy teenager, but I remember specific times when I would just be yelling at my parents or bursting into tears, which wasn't really me at all. And then I guess after a while, I became quite desensitized to that, or I accepted that as my new normal. But then after that, I noticed that other people were reacting to me in a different way. So my family were sort of treading on eggshells and getting frustrated with me. And I was thinking, well, why are they being so difficult? I'm just doing my thing. Why can't they leave me alone? So definitely it was evidence to people around me that I wasn't acting like myself.
And how quickly did it escalate to a point that either you or somebody else felt we need some intervention here?
I think my mum was very on it. I think she knew that I was quite a sensitive child. She knew that I didn't particularly like how my body looked. And so she immediately, and we'd always been a very foodie family. So I'd grown up eating the same food that my parents ate, sitting at the dinner table. I wasn't fussy in any way. So when I started saying, oh no, can you just take this off my plate? I don't want to have that. I don't want to have pudding. I don't want to have another slice of toast or whatever. That was very, very alarming for my mum. So she, within a couple of months, she'd like book me into the doctors to do the thing of like, is there a physical cause? Why is she doing this? Why does she need to have blood tests for her thyroid to see if, you know, my thyroid was making me lose weight? But I think that was all just a routine thing, whereas actually my mum knew that this was something that I was doing of my own volition.
Just for clarity, Caroline, because I haven't asked, and I know that obviously I've mentioned that you yourself were a doctor. Anybody in your family have medical training? You're not from parents who are also doctors? Because you sound like your mum was really on it. I just wonder, did she have medical training? Is that why you think that she was on it, or was that just coincidence that she was?
Honestly, I think it was just coincidence. I know my mum had her own experience with disordered eating when she was a teenager, and she overcame that without any professional help, and there was no dieting in my family when I was growing up. But she also has a chronic illness that means that she has to be more aware of what she's eating. And I think because of that, she was just sort of a little bit more in tune with health and with diet. So when I started changing my behavior and changing my diet, that was quite alarming for her.
Gosh, wow. Okay, so let's talk about that
Yeah.
Sorry, Caroline, carry on.
No, sorry, I was just, to answer your question, no one in my family is medical,
Okay. So tell us a little bit about that doctor intervention and how that came about and how successful or otherwise it was in terms of getting you on the right path.
So that initial meeting, I was not in a place where I wanted to hear it. I was still young, I was still very much in denial. But I remember the doctor getting out a bit of cardboard where you twist the two circles round and it says like, what's a healthy weight range? And it seemed like he just picked a number out of the blue, and this number was a number that I'd never weighed before. It was like completely alien to me, and he's like, well, if you get back to here, then we can all stop worrying. And that was it. It was a very old school intervention.
Oh my God, do you know what, I can almost feel a bit sort of kind of spine tingly when you say that, because I can recall my doctor doing that, and I know what you mean about the interlinking circles, and then if that weight matches that and that height, then therefore that's it, you know, that's either good, bad or indifferent, so if we get back to this, we'll be all right.
Yeah.
Wow. Incredible.
And that's, I guess, at that point the ball was rolling. I was referred to child mental health services, and I guess because it was over 10 years ago, the waiting times were less, and I know now it's much more difficult to access any mental health service, but fortunately within a few months I was then referred to a psychiatrist, and I was being seen fairly regularly. And I'll talk a little bit more about my specific experience of that, but the thing that, just thinking about it now, is that again, it was all focused on weight. Nobody said to me, okay, this is going to make you feel better, this is how people overcome an eating disorder. It was just, you're losing too much weight and we are going to work against your behaviors to help you gain weight. It was very much once you get back to this arbitrary number, then everyone will get off your back. But there was nothing about why you're doing this or why the brain might be why your brain might be working in this way to make you want to lose weight, or how the anxiety works, or how like you can overcome obsessions or compulsions. It was just, right, you need to add in an extra X to your diet and keep doing that, and then you can go back to school, or then you can go and see your friends or go and do sports.
In your professional capacity, Caroline, do you think that, because I find it really interesting, there's depending on who you speak to, it's you do brain and weight at the same time, or you do weight and then you follow that with the brain and the behaviors, or you do the behaviors first and follow that with the weight. Is there a way, is there a best practice in order to be able to gain the necessary weight to get physically out of risk, whilst also dealing with the behavioural shifts that are needed in order to become mentally and physically out of risk?
That's such an interesting question, because from my personal experience of when I've been underweight as an adult, I don't think when you're actively, I don't think you have the cognitive capacity to really do a lot of like brain-based things other than getting over the fear of having specific foods, which you can do as you're sort of getting back to a healthy weight. And it's also different between children and adults. So in children, it's much more paternalistic. It's more, right, the family are going to take over control, they're going to do foods. There might be some family therapy involved, but the therapy is basically restoring a healthy diet and a healthy relationship with food. Whereas in adult services, you may well be referred to do therapy at the same time, because individual therapy is more commonly used in adults, whereas it's family therapy used in children. So I think it really is, like you say, there's such a disparate discrepancy between different services in different areas of the country.
It's really interesting. I can remember when I was inpatient, I remember in one unit they said to me that because part of me had sort of accepted that by being inpatient, at least I was going to get the right treatment really intensively, see the right therapist. And I remember them telling me that I wasn't going to get any therapy for the first couple of weeks at least, and feeling really frustrated about that. And their whole rationale was, well, you just need more nutrition before we can even engage you in that. And I still wonder, like, you know, how helpful it is, or is it still that we try and do both at the same time, or because, you know, otherwise sometimes I don't know. I think you raise a really good point there, Sarah, because it is a bit of a chicken egg, isn't it? You know.
And we speak to so many folks, don't we, that say, well, I can't start until because I don't have any therapy yet.
Yeah.
And knowing what I know about recovery, that's not true. You can start before the therapy, but at some point you do need the therapy, but you can start without it. And I think it's different from when I was there, but now looking back, when I'm speaking to folks that say that, that's when I get really frustrated, because it's you know, the only way out is through. You have to, at some point as an adult, embrace it, start it, and then hopefully at some point along the line you will get expert help that can then help you with the bigger issues.
Well, that's why I think it's sort of self-facilitated therapy initially, isn't it? For a better description, it's kind of, okay, this is the reality. Professional therapy will help me at a point that I can engage with it and get the best from it. Right now, in the absence of that, the single mind, physical, whatever therapy that I need for myself is to do the doing. Unfortunately, I need to do the really tough bit. I need to speak to myself and need to make it happen. And I know there'll be so many people listening to this saying, oh yeah, it's all very well you saying that, but it's so hard, it's so hard. There isn't a single person on this three-way podcast who doesn't know how bloody hard it is. You know, we've all been there. But the paralysis of saying, yes, but I can't change my eating behaviours because the doctor won't see me, the therapist won't see me. All that's doing is just playing into your narrative that you are the victim. This will never change. This is just going to get worse. So
even if you go to therapy an hour a week or 3 hours a week, that leaves the rest of the week where you've got to still make the behaviour yourself. Like, and it's difficult whether or not you're in therapy for that hour or not. I think that people are starting off in their, like, right at the beginning of their recovery, something like psychoeducation and a bit of distress tolerance, so that just to make those first steps a little bit easier. And so you can say, oh no, I need to do this to get my brain out of starvation mode. Because if you're just someone who's got an eating disorder that doesn't really understand why that's come about, and then someone says, oh, you just need to increase your diet, it's incredibly difficult then to then do that when the eating disorder will be saying, yeah, but you don't need to because of this and this and this. Whereas even if you don't have formal therapy, you can say, no, I need to because it will help my brain be less chaotic or less obsessive. That is just a really useful step to be able to put in place before accessing proper therapy.
I think what you've just said there, I don't know what you feel, Sarah, but I think that really struck something for me that actually I think a lot of people really could take away from that. This, the psychoeducation, the distress tolerance, I think that bit is something anybody that has a genuine desire to recover from an eating disorder needs to accept, that those are the elements that actually are going to be self-driven and are things that you can at least get out the starting blocks with. Talk to me a little bit more about, from a professional, but also from your own perspective, about how do we deal with, give us some kind of, I really like this podcast wherever possible, not to just be navel gazing about the awfulness of dealing with an eating disorder, but the real, what can we do? How can we get others to help us, but also how can we help ourselves? So let's just focus in a little bit harder for a minute on that distress tolerance and kind of steps that really make for some, I'm not even talking about groundbreaking change, but some of the things that you would say, why does that matter? Why have we got to go through it? And what does it look like?
So for me, I my sort of last big push at recovery was about a year, 18 months ago. And this was the point where I was doing the steps, sort of doing it in a more structured way, rather than just being like, I want to recover, but I've got no clue how to do it. This time I was like, no, I'm going to get to a point where the eating disorder doesn't come back and it can't get its foot in the door. So to start with, I suppose just being able to sit and know that whatever distress you're feeling, it won't kill you. Knowing that if you have a Kit Kat or if you have a yogurt and your heart starts pounding and you start sweating and your brain's telling you every reason why you shouldn't have had that yogurt, it's not going to do that forever. And just sort of understanding the basic principles of anxiety, that it reaches a peak and then it gets better. And the more you sit with that anxiety, then the more times you repeat it, the lower the peak is each time. And being able to do that and maybe tell someone around me and say, okay, I've had a yogurt and I feel a bit anxious now. And then whether that be a friend or my partner, and they say, okay, how long is the anxiety lasting? I say, oh, it lasted 3.5 hours. And then next time, oh, it lasted 2 hours. Oh, it lasted 20 minutes. And just sort of being able to quantify it, rather than this is just going to last forever and it's insurmountable, realizing no, actually there's quantifiable improvements here, even if it is really minuscule.
I think that's really sensible. Does that sound something that you think that you could be sharing more with, like, the people that you do befriending with, Sarah? I mean, certainly for people I talk to, I think it's, some of what Caroline has said there would be really helpful.
Without doubt, I've never heard it called distress tolerance before, but everything you just spoken about there, Caroline, and I'm thinking back through some of the things that I was taught to do. It was all about that. It was all about tolerating that moment, but that moment will pass. And you're dead right. Those moments get shorter and shorter. I suppose the trick is, if it's a trick, is giving it enough time to get shorter. There's a trap, isn't there, where anything in life, we're the changing rooms generation, so we like things done really as quick as possible. And this is not. This is a lengthy process, and from any one of us, it will be a totally different length of time. But it's giving it the time and the effort to understand that it will get shorter and it will get easier. But you have to go through those really long periods before it does. And then there's all those other techniques, isn't there, that people out there, you'd have been given hundreds of things to do when you're in those moments of distress and anxiety. My little girl the other day, Amy, she came out of the bedroom, she decided she wanted to learn how to crochet. I was nearly physically sick. I thought, if I look at a flipping crochet hook again in my life. But at the time, I'm not a crafter, but at the time, that just monotonous action got me through periods of real distress. So whatever it is, it's really important, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think it's really tempting to want to try to find things that will ameliorate this anxiety. And if we're in distress, like, okay, what will make it feel better? But actually, the things that will make it feel better will be going for a walk after you've had a meal, or making the meal slightly smaller. And actually, one of the things I had to really reconcile was the fact that you have to make yourself feel, you have to lean into that discomfort and find the things that are going to make you uncomfortable. If sitting down on the sofa for 2 hours watching a movie makes you uncomfortable, then actually sitting down and having a biscuit is going to be even worse. And once you're sort of comfortable with that anxiety and knowing that the pounding in your chest or the racing thoughts aren't going to kill you, you can get a bit more creative and try to find things that are going to really piss off the eating disorder.
That's really interesting. So let's look at a little bit about your professional steps and kind of getting into the world of being in medicine and how that's come about. Was it a conscious decision based on what you'd been through as a young person? Was it something that you'd always wanted to do? How did you stumble into that world?
I'm not sure. I keep getting confused about how I actually ended up wanting to do medicine. I think I always wanted to do it, and I always found mental health interesting, but I'm sure my own experiences will have added to that as well. So I think like right from the age of maybe 12 or 13, I wanted to be a doctor. And then as I went through school and sixth form, and I was off school for a little bit of time with my own mental health, that was something I was interested in and something I knew about. So I didn't know about kidneys, I didn't know about lungs, but I knew about, how mental health works, and when people get prescribed medications, what that does to people. So I fortunately got into university, went to med school, and then it just continued that it was an active choice to do psychiatry, but you rotate through different specialties as part of your training, and psychiatry was the only one that I really sort of could see myself doing. I enjoyed all of the specialties, but I just really had a lot of time for psychiatry and would stay behind and read about patients and read textbooks, which I think is it's a good way to choose any job. If you actively want to stay and learn more about it, then that's a pretty good sign.
So let me be devil's advocate, because we come across a lot of people in this community, and I'm befriending some people at the minute who talk about, well, I think when I get myself well, I think I really actually just want to study nutrition, I want to study eating disorders, I want to be an eating disorders nurse, whatever. Tell me about how much you think that was a challenging world for you to go in, and whether in some ways were you still making those decisions I'm not going to say in a poorly mindset, but do you think you had to question, why am I doing this? Am I doing this to choose this profession rather than to focus on Caroline's health? Does that make sense to you? Do you see what I mean? I sometimes wonder if those two co-compete.
I almost think it's almost like mental hunger at some points, rather than your own recovery. You just spend
recipe books.
Time everyone else's recovery, or looking at recipe books, or looking at nutrition. Absolutely. And I definitely remember in medical school you have to learn how to critically appraise articles, and I remember critically appraising articles about the best diet or the best diet for this specific health problem. So I'm sure that played into it. But interestingly, when I was at uni, I had completely squashed down the eating disorder identity. So when I went to university, I was like, right, I've had an eating disorder now for 6 years. I don't want it to take up any more time in my life. But instead of doing the actual recovery work, I just gained weight, transferred all of my rigidity and all of my anxiety onto other areas of my life. And at the time I was quite obsessed with the gym, and I was still very emotionally volatile and had quite low self-esteem. But because of that, I never really had any interest in going into eating disorder psychiatry. I was just like, well, that's something that happened to me, and it's now something that I don't about at all, because it's not relevant to me. So in a way that was protective, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword with fitness, because I don't think that you can fully recover through what I tried to do, was through becoming really fit and healthy and going to the gym and lifting weights. But
I think you can probably just about now, everybody. You can hear Sarah and I giving this woman a round
Chuckling
of applause in the
and chuckling.
How many people come on this podcast? Well, not necessarily this podcast, but are in this community and somehow think the two can happily, bumble along together.
But I do think that it served a purpose, and that's the thing that you can't disregard, that eating, even if you stay in a state of quasi recovery for a long time, that can serve a purpose. Because for me, by getting up, going to the gym, I was able to get through university without having done any of the difficult work. Whereas if I had not been very rigid and very orthorexic, I probably would have just really been deep into a depression. And I'm not saying that I'm glad that I spent however many years in quasi recovery, but looking back now, I can see why it was the least bad option at the time. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you're aware, like if you don't do the proper recovery work, you're really vulnerable to relapse. So that's where I ended up a couple of years ago when I started working, because suddenly I couldn't live this really regimented life, because I was working 12-hour shifts and night shifts and living with my partner and trying to pay taxes and all of this stuff. It's very hard to maintain that alongside a low-level eating disorder.
I think it's that thing, isn't it? You have to be able to tolerate life.
Yeah.
And life will always throw things up to you. Like, it'll throw joy and beauty, but it will throw up hell and sadness. And you have to be in a healthy position, physically and more importantly mentally, where you can tolerate life. And if you hang on to the eating disorder in any which way, especially in that quasi state, at any point where there are those slight moments where life starts to get challenging or difficult, or like you said, Caroline, you have to come out of routine. We all have heard a million times, and we all know, we've experienced it. It comes back. It's just there under the surface, and the second it finds the chink, it comes back. Which is why I think we have to acknowledge, and I'd really like to acknowledge, that those periods where we think we're coping and we think we've structured things in a manner so that we can survive, that's only tested when actually life throws something up so that we can't survive. And then it's whether the eating disorder returns or whether you actually have built up enough of a new person, a new identity, and a new real healthy way of living, so that you can cope with anything that life throws up on you.
Yeah.
What was ultimately your way back from what became your sort of almost, later life recovery, not massively later life, but further down the road? How did you manage to claw your way back this time around?
I just got to the point where I was so fed up, and I was so fed up with not knowing why I felt so unhappy, because I wasn't the stereotypically very physically unwell anorexic person. I also wasn't like a chronic dieter, yo-yo dieting or anything. And I wasn't someone who was so obsessed with the gym that they couldn't take a day off. Like, I could take a day off, but I felt like I was constantly being pummeled by emotions that I hadn't learned to deal with, by eating disorder thoughts that I hadn't overcome, by sort of, I could go out and have a cake, but it would play on my mind so much. So I wasn't like completely unable to have foods. And I was just thinking, this is not the level of life that I want to be living for the next 50 years. And then around the same time, that was when we went into lockdown, and I briefly sort of, with the stress of losing my routine, I briefly went back to eating disorder behaviors and started getting really obsessive again. And I was like, this is either I can let this really take me back, or I can start working on my own recovery properly. And that was when I think I started seeing more people on social media who had done like all-in recovery, which isn't something that I ended up doing, but just being able to see people going through recovery from disordered eating, from orthorexia, that was something I'd never really seen before. I just assumed that if you were a little bit funny about food, that was your existence forever.
Well, that's interesting that, I know we've been talking recently about having somebody on that's going to talk about all in recovery. And it's interesting that even though you didn't actually end up following that path, by looking at people that had followed that journey, perhaps because of the pace of it, the pace of recovery progression in someone that's followed all in some ways it was useful to you. And I wonder whether it was just enough to make you continuously have this reminder that recovery is possible, these people are doing it. Is that kind of how that played its part?
Yeah, so I guess that was maybe the first half of my recovery journey this time around, because unfortunately then I was trying to follow this all-in recovery, but I'd still got all of this baggage, all of this like not being able to deal with emotions. And as things got more difficult, especially like in my job, getting more responsibility, understaffing because of COVID, I was not able to deal with the anxiety of it at all. And suddenly I flipped back and had this terrible relapse that I'd not really had a proper relapse into my eating disorder since I'd been an adult. And I quite quickly became quite unwell physically. And at that point, I didn't feel like it was possible to go into all in from being very sort of rigid and eating disordered in your thinking to then suddenly go into all in. At that time, I was like, no, I can't just step back into it. So at that point, I was doing the writing down fear foods, ticking them off, your diet, the more structured way that maybe services would recommend.
It's a bit more analytical about it all.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think when you've got a starving brain that loves routine and order, it's actually a little bit more comforting to be able to have that structure to hang things on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So one of the reasons that I'm so glad that we've had the opportunity to chat to you is to hear about being in the medical profession and kind of with those that sort of internal perspective on how the profession deals with people that have eating disorders. Now that you've been a doctor for some time, what can you reflect that would point to the fact that either kind of more continues to need to be done, or that we as those that go through an eating disorder need to change the way we're dealing with medical professionals? What are the things that can help us all stop living with the assumptions that we have about the other party?
So something that really struck me when I accessed services as a patient recently was that it seems to be that there is more understanding now of having a set point. It's not just everybody has to get to this minimally healthy BMI and then you'll be discharged instantly. It's that they take on board your mental state as well. So if you're a minimally healthy BMI and still absolutely addled by eating disorder thoughts, they're going to keep working with you, and they're going to keep like reassuring you that your body knows what it wants to do, and your body will keep giving you these hunger signals until you're at a healthy weight for your body, which was just, it took me a long time to accept that I wasn't suddenly going to be discharged as soon as I reached a healthy weight. So I think from the perspective of a patient is you don't need to prove how sick you are. Like, services are much more aware now that early intervention and getting to a fully healthy state is the best way to ensure people don't relapse and don't keep using services, and don't, to be blunt about it, don't keep using services which cost money, because all of healthcare is trying to keep people well so that they then don't use services. So yeah, I used to feel like I had to come in and pretend that, or not even pretend, but like really overplay the things that were really difficult for me and completely disregard anything that had gone well, because I was scared that if I said, oh well, I had ice cream and I enjoyed it, they'd be like, well, what are you here for? Why? Go on, go and enjoy your ice cream. From the point of view of a doctor, I think in general, in psychiatry as well, because psychiatry isn't specialised towards eating disorders for the most part, there's a big sense of feeling overwhelmed by patients with eating disorders because of this overlapping physical presentation, emotional dysregulation, the fact that people can become very unwell very quickly, and that they can be quite rigid in their thinking. It's really, really difficult. And I suppose just that's something that needs more education. And I know recently the BEAT campaign has been to have more education for medical professionals, and I think that's really needed.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I do think, I mean, I know that we've had some medical professionals reach out to us, and in particular we're doing a lot of work with midwives and health visitors as well. And so I think the very fact that anybody in the medical profession, whatever sphere they specialise in, is keen to have that engagement, that you know, really warms my heart. That, you know, I'm pleased that's happening. I don't think it is any longer, no, you know, this is all about BMI and we're just staying true to what we've been doing as the tick box exercise for the last 50 years. You know, I think there is a desire for change. I think until that change manifests in everyone that goes to university, gets it from the ground up when they go to med school, I think for now it is kind of sort of still on our own plate, isn't it, as those families or individuals that present, to say, actually, we need to remember that we have got voice, we need to keep challenging it. If we're not happy, we have to ask to speak to somebody else. We need to write down everything we're thinking and feeling. We need to share that. We need to not allow for the expectation of what somebody might know about my eating disorder.
Yeah. And I suppose from the point of view of someone in psychiatry, what I try to do, even if it's a patient with issues not related to food or eating or body image, in my consultation, I'll always say, okay, and is there any, if they mention their body image, I'll say, okay, is that something that plays on your mind? If they mention their diet, I'll say, do you feel like you have any issues with your diet? Do you feel like you're out of control around food? Because I think it's so normalized that people hate their bodies or that they're dieting, but actually that can really play into, especially other mental health problems. Like, I think it's important in physical health medicine, but if you have a patient who is depressed or who's anxious or who has like obsessive compulsive disorder, there's a very high likelihood that that will play out in their body as well.
Yeah, very, very good point. So people don't always present first off with an eating disorder, but other issues.
Yeah.
Goodness, wow. My goodness, it's been a really fascinating chat with you, Caroline, and I can't thank you enough, and I hope we'll chat again very soon, because I know we'd love to do some more work with you about coming from the perspective of being a medical professional, because as you say, there is a focus on it this year thanks to BEAT's campaign this year, and long overdue, isn't it, Sarah? I mean, certainly, you know, we sort of both feel that GPs, you know, God love them, and I always say on this podcast, it's never about chastising those in the medical profession, because they do amazing work, but I just think that education piece, and it's upon us with lived experience to share back what we've been through to help them understand the eating disorder from a different prism.
Yeah, I'd love to, and I'm not 100% sure where I'm going to go with my own career, like if I work in eating disorders or not. That's not a decision I want to make yet, because I've got to do my own like recovery work and really solidify that. But definitely, if I can do advocacy work within my career, that is 100% where I want to go. So yeah, I'd happily talk again.
Look forward to that. Thank you so much. Sarah, lovely to see you as always. Caroline, thank you very much. We're going to put some more details about where you can follow Caroline on her social media accounts in the show notes on this episode. So take a look at those. If you've got any questions and you fancy us doing a live Q&A, she says, putting Caroline on the spot, then, and you think that, you know, we should have another live chat with Caroline where you can put some questions to her, or you've got just kind of individual queries about how Caroline decided to go into the medical profession and what that meant for her own recovery, by all means drop us an email and we will make sure that Caroline gets those. And as I say, no doubt we will be back doing something with her very, very soon. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your weekend for those of you that listen really soon. And if not, enjoy your week. And let's hope these temperatures come up a little bit so I can shed a few layers. Okay, take care of yourselves and we will see you on another episode of Wednesday's Child very, very soon.